Good afternoon, everybody. Really nice to be with you. This is the second webinar in our Trade Forward Southern Africa series of 3 webinars. Really nice to be with you. If you are in Africa, it's afternoon. I do know we have people from the US with us and people from as far afield as Vietnam in the Far East. So really nice to have all of you. I can see the room is still filling up. We've taken well over 400 registrations for this afternoon. Many people will be watching the recording afterwards and will not attend the session live. But we've got the next 90 minutes or a little bit less to talk to you about mussels in South Africa, and particularly around the work of Trade Forward Southern Africa in addressing some of the export barriers to mussels. On your screen at the moment is not a mussel, it's an abalone. The picture was used generically across our series of webinars. Last week we spoke about abalone and we had a very, very full session. This week we are speaking about mussels. We've got some time to deal with questions this week. And then next week, we will be finishing off this session with, or the series, with a discussion around South African oysters. So dealing in the three episodes with all of the farmed shellfish from South Africa. I will be introducing you to the other panel members in a second. Before I do that, I'd like to just run through 1 or 2 basics. I can see we're fast heading up towards 100 people online. I can see many people are already using the chat panel, and I want you to please say hi on the chat panel. I can see Neva Majiri from Zimbabwe has just said hi. Antonio from Mozambique, nice to have you here. All the way from Mexico, Alberto, nice to have you on the session this afternoon. I think it's early morning for you in Mexico. Iksan Carstens from South Africa, Cape Town, welcome. Lots of friends from Egypt. Nice to have all of you with us. Please use the chat panel to say hi. It's always nice to interact with you and get your comments on the chat panel. Please use the question and answer panel for your questions. It's easier for me and for the moderators to follow your questions in the Q&A panel. As you know, the webinar is recorded. In your email tomorrow will be a link to the recording as well. Many people will watch the recording afterwards, and we will keep the recording in the cloud so that you can reference it if you've missed anything. You will also get an email with a PDF copy of the presentations. And at the end of our session today, I will share the email addresses of the speakers. You are welcome to contact them for follow-up questions. So without wasting any more time, sit back, learn from this webinar. We are already almost 10 minutes into our session. We've got about 80 minutes or so left, and we have much material that we would like to cover. As I've already said, the webinar last week dealt with abalone. If you missed that webinar last week, I'm happy to send you the link to the recording. Please pop me an email. You'll get my email address at the end, and we'll send you that link. Today is mussels, and then on the 23rd of February, we will be discussing oysters. The program for today, I'm just finishing up this welcome. Then shortly, I will be handing over to Sim Dube from Trade Forward Southern Africa. We will then take some comments and a few slides from Lisa Mazzoleni. Lisa is from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. We will then have a short video clip around mussels, and then we will be getting or having a talk from Mr. Vos Pienaar. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Vos Pienaar just before we take his talk. He's arguably the most knowledgeable person in terms of mussel production, certainly in South Africa, but possibly much broader in the African context, and a leading figure in mussel production. I will then do a short talk on the work that was done by TFSA This is part 2 of the talk around that work. I'll introduce some of the nuts and bolts around the guidelines that have been developed by TFSA, and then we'll have enough time for discussion and questions. On that note, another full afternoon or another full episode. I'd like to invite Sim Dube to open up his camera and microphone. Sim has been instrumental in making sure that all of this work comes together. Sim is from Trade Forward Southern Africa, and they have been involved in supporting the work to address some of the export barriers of farmed shellfish from South Africa. Sim, over to you. Word of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Etienne. I really appreciate the introduction. And again, I really appreciate the participants that have actually made time to attend this important webinar. I also want to thank, obviously, the panelists, the experts that have given time to actually come and talk to us about mussels and the growth of aquaculture in the region. As TFSA, we value this collaboration, and it actually talks to our key objectives, which I'm going to talk about just briefly. But maybe just to give you a brief outline in terms of who TFSA are, the Trade Forward Southern Africa. We're actually a 3-year project which is funded by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. And we operate in the 6 Southern African countries. We call them SACU plus Mozambique. This is Botswana, Eswatini, Mozambique, Namibia, and South Africa. So the program on its own, it really aims to build capacity and technical assistance to help grow trade and find targeted solutions to improve gender equality in trade to alleviate poverty across the SACU plus M region. And we really work to 3 key objectives, 4 key objectives that I'm just going to try and talk to briefly. It's really sharing information and ensuring that we have our partners, potentially partners accessing information through our School of Export. This is a free of charge kind of School of Export online, where actually potential exporters can actually look at, learn how to export and also how to address some of the key challenges that you face when exporting. We also have a strategy of actually targeting particular value chains that we believe show growth in the region, and especially where they have a special bias to women. And so we have targeted particular value chains, and one of them is aquaculture, which is why we actually work with our partners in the aquaculture sector. We also do quite a bit of work deliberately with women in trade. So we support women, we train women, and we're currently embarking on a program where we're actually getting them to access markets, key markets, so they can export their products. The whole reason why we got into aquaculture, I think we're quite aware, all of us are aware that it's a fast-growing industry, and it's actually considered one that's going to be able to feed us in the future. So it's very important that we get involved in this kind of work. And with our partners, in South Africa and in the region as well, we've actually developed or supported the exports in aquaculture through collaborations with TFSA partners in updating the South African roadmap to EU compliance to South African aquaculture sector. So basically, this kind of webinar is us really trying to talk about it, trying to disseminate all the information to the partners, ensuring that we grow our markets and we grow the industry. So I'll just leave it at that and ensure that we give our experts all the time to talk to us about the mussels in the region and how we can actually support each other to grow exports. Thank you very much, MC.
Fantastic, Sim. Thank you for that short introduction from TFSA. Certainly, TFSA are playing or have played and continue to play an important role in not only the development of aquaculture in the Southern African region, but the development of several other value chains. When I do a short talk just now, I will be showing some of the tools that have been developed by TFSA, particularly around the export of aquaculture or farmed shellfish products. We have online with us also today Lisa Mazzoleni. Lisa from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment has joined us and kindly offered to just give a little bit of background on the work of the department in this mussel sector. And I'm really happy to have her on board. She knows the mussel sector a lot better than I do, and exciting to have you, Lisa. Thanks. I can see your camera is open. Lisa, you can open up microphone, and you're welcome to go ahead and share your screen as well.
Thank you, Etienne. Good afternoon, everyone from South Africa side. I am Lisa Mazzaleni. I am the Deputy Director responsible for investment promotions at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. We fall under the fisheries branch of the department, and we drive the mandate of aquaculture growth and economic development. So I'll just give a short overview on our key priorities as government and also what we've done in terms of marketing to support this amazing sector. Is my presentation visible?
Lisa, yes, thanks. You can go into presentation mode. I can see your screen.
Okay, wonderful. There we go.
Perfect.
Thank you, fantastic. Yes, so just to touch on, just to touch on sort of the key focus areas as government. Obviously, our aim is to create sustainable job opportunities for the people of South Africa, specifically people within the aquaculture sector, foster economic growth, capitalize on export opportunities, stimulate rural development and livelihoods, attract foreign direct investment, which is something I work quite closely with, safeguard sustainable environmental integrity, and also create SMMEs and wealth opportunities through aquaculture. These are our main focus areas. Just a second. Okay. Our key initiatives towards sort of market growth and diversification in terms of the mussel sector, overall, we have a South African certification framework that we developed a few years ago, and this will guide sort of certification of aquaculture products so that they can be sold to export markets, and having that certification logo and of various programs. We have updated and implemented a food safety monitoring program that is in line with local and relevant international standards. This is done in collaboration with various competent authorities. We've also developed a public awareness and marketing strategy for aquaculture products and the sector in South Africa. This was done in 2019, closely with sector and with the industry as well as the private sector, such as retailers and so forth, where we looked at what's currently being done and where we can take the sector in terms of marketing going forward, what are our key priorities, and we have a marketing plan. We also monitor this with our marketing working group that meets on a quarterly basis, which has various industry representatives. As we understand that industry doesn't have the capacity to be farming as well as also involved in marketing, which is why government thought let's work hand in hand so that we can implement this. Then, in terms of research, we have applied research to improve existing farming technology and sustainability in collaboration with industry. This includes a strong focus towards integrated multi-trophic aquaculture systems. Is it going next? Okay, perfect. So some of the key activities that we've done in terms of marketing, we have some collateral. We have developed recipe books. So the recipe books basically show you how you can sort of create some nice recipes using aquaculture products. We also give a story on how it's farmed in the latest version. We have an aquaculture value proposition. The value proposition is used for foreign direct investment. This is where we give an overview of the sector, where are the best places to invest, why South Africa is a good place to come and invest and start an aquaculture farm, what support and incentives are available, and this is a document that we have available. And then what's displayed here is our annual reports, where we do reporting on our various sort of programs or strategies that we have going. One such is Operation Pakisa. Over the last few years, since we've started the marketing strategy, we have done videos on 6 species: mussels, oysters, trout, catfish, tilapia, and abalone. Right after this, we'll show you the mussels video. This is just to also promote that our local South African consumers should be looking at eating local seafood, Also making them aware about aquaculture and what products are available. And also we've done an advertorial in an in-flight magazine at the time, which was Mango, where we showed the video on the flight and then we had the recipe in the magazine. Excuse me. We also then run various social media campaigns on our departmental social pages, such as Facebook and Twitter. And we work closely with industry to further promote sector-wide sort of other marketing campaigns that they are developing. So we amplify that. Yeah, and I think that's all from me. Etienne, you may go ahead and show us the mussel video.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I will show that video in a second. I know when we showed the abalone video last week, we suddenly lost a lot of participants after we showed the recipe because it looks so good and it makes you so hungry. So I can tell you this 4-minute video that's coming up now has also got a little mussel recipe in it. Lisa, thanks for that input. I'm sure there are going to be questions. I can see some questions on the Q&A panel already. Bear with us just for a few seconds while we get the video running and get the sound sharing, and then enjoy this little input. For those of you that are on a weak internet signal or your bandwidth is weak, if you can't follow the video, don't stress. We will put the link to the video in your email feed tomorrow. So we'll play the 4-minute video now, and if it's a little bit fuzzy on your side, you can certainly watch the video once we've sent you the link. We'll call it up now and enjoy the next little input.
My name is Nolan Adams. I'm the manager of a mussel farming business in the inner bay of Saldanha. I am a mussel farmer for the past 4 or 5 years. I am an entrepreneur. We saw the opportunity and we bought into a farm, and as from then we never looked back. We farm mussels on rafts in the inner bay, and underneath the raft there's 800 ropes, and the dropper is about 6 to 7 meters long, so in actual fact there's about 4.8 kilometers of rope under each raft. Our farm is 30 hectares big. For each hectare you can have one raft. Mussels attach naturally to ropes. Every day is seeding day, every day is harvesting day. As from seeding day till harvesting day, it's about 7 months. The inner bay of Saldanha is very good for farming mussels. The water is very cold, it's rich in feed, and our mussels is of a very good quality, much better than in any part of the world. Our mussels are available in the whole of South Africa. All of our staff are locally employed. On the farm we have 12 people. Most of them are half-skilled or unskilled. We also have a few skilled people. All of them are male. However, in the factory we have 110 people employed. About 90% are women. Our mussels are very safe to eat. We do regular tests of the water and of the mussel itself. So between DAF and the NRCS, we ensure that our mussels are DSP-free, PSP-free. We also do all our tests according to the food safety program. And that is we done according to international standards. Government has supported us tremendously through Operation Pakisa. The Pakisa program has unlocked doors for us. Through Pakisa, we gained more water space. We also are part of the CASP, the Comprehensive Agriculture Support Program, which funded a huge part of our farming business. People from time to time, they want to see how we farm mussels, how we do what is the culture. So there are regular boat tours. What you see behind me, this is South Africa's mussel farming industry. Mussels are very good to eat. It's very high in protein. It has no fat. Mussels are very high in vitamins D and E. Every 10 tons of mussels that we farm in the inner bay, you directly create one job in the factory.
All right. Thank you, colleagues. I trust you enjoyed that little video clip, just telling us a little bit about the South African mussel industry and showing us a really fantastic recipe at the end. I've been very lucky to have eaten the mussels from that industry, and certainly some of the most flavorful mussels around the world. I see there are many friends that I recognize online. Rafael from Mozambique. I haven't spoken to you for years. I know Mozambique at one stage looked at the farming of brown mussels or perna. Veronica from the Seychelles, nice to see you online with us today. And then Rob all the way from Scotland. Nice to know that we've got people from really from far afield that are joining us in this webinar today. Our numbers have grown. I think we're standing on just under 140 or so people online. Please remember to put your questions in the Q&A panel. I can see comments still coming through on the chat panel. If you've got a particular question for Lisa or Sim or Fuss that will be speaking next, please pop it in the Q&A. If we have time at the end, we'll also take a couple of live questions. So sit back and relax. We've got about an hour left. Our next speaker, I had a little bit of trouble when we were planning this webinar. I kept asking around who we can get to speak, and every person that I got to said to me, go and speak to Fuss Pienaar. So Fuss has been at the pinnacle of mussel farming in South Africa for many, many years. I've known Fuss for a few years. When I was still a student, some 25 years ago, Fuss was already leading the industry. So I don't think there's a better person to guide us through a little bit of overview and an understanding of the mussel market from a South African perspective. Fuss, as I understand it, has been farming mussels for 23 years. And he's also the chairman of the Bivalve Shellfish Farming Association of South Africa. I can tell you that before he farmed mussels, he was an active oyster farming in Knysna as well. So certainly a man with exceptional experience in this sector. Fuss, thank you for joining us. You can open up your microphone and your camera and go ahead and share your screen. Thank you, Fuss.
Thanks, Etienne. I hope you can see me and hear me.
Great, we can see and hear you. You're welcome to go ahead.
You can see my screen as well.
Fuss, I can see you on camera. The screen share hasn't come through yet.
Let me try that again. Now you should see it.
Let's just give it a second. I haven't picked up anything yet. Fuss, not coming through yet. Should we try and share it from this side?
Let me just have a look. Yeah, could you do that?
We'll pull it up from our side quickly. While we're working on just calling up the next presentation, just a reminder for the questions in the Q&A panel, put them in there now so that we can start looking at them and so that we can respond to those questions. Fuss, just give us a second. We'll have it on the screen shortly.
Okay, there you go.
Right, Fuss, you ready
So
to go?
you're in control of that now, eh?
Yes, I'm in control, so you can just tell me to switch to the next slide.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Yes, you can do the next slide now. Well, there I am. My name is Fuss Pienaar. I farm mussels here in Saldanha. I still do after a long time. Prior to that, I farmed oysters in Eisner for 15 years. It's a way of life, isn't it? I think Nolan just about said everything. I don't need to carry on with my presentation, but do us the next slide there, Etienne. Just a little overview. We've got a coastline of some 3,000 kilometers. Colder water on the west coast, driven by the Benguela current from the South Pole. East coast is warmer water, driven by the Mozambique and Angola currents from the equator, not Angola, Angolas. It's a high energy coastline, high wave energy. There are almost no sheltered bays on the South African coast. We have 3 species, main species, Perna on the east coast. We got Coromytilus on the west coast. Both are indigenous. And then we have Mytilus galloprovincialis everywhere. A lot of you would probably be familiar with the galloprovincialis. It was introduced into South Africa by shipping. It's a dominant species today, and it's known as the Spanish mussel. And it is this mussel that is also the backbone of our mussel farming. There is no commercial wild harvesting of mussel on the coast. And we can do the next slide, Etienne. There's Saldanha. You can see on the graphic where it is more or less in South Africa, about 100 kilometers northwest of Cape Town. And then an aerial shot directly from above Saldanha Bay, showing the 3 precincts where mussels are farmed: Big Bay, Small Bay, and Outer Bay, North Bay. Just a little aside on Saldanha. Saldanha is actually a massive iron ore export harbour. Some 60 million tons of iron export, iron ore export per year. 6,000 tons an hour goes out of Saldanha. Now you can see the bay being pierced from the east by the iron ore export harbour, and in the half moon to the west of that is an artificial breakwater that was built to protect the ore harbour, or the ore jetty, from the open ocean swell. Now, that also gave us the calm, protected waters for mussel farming, of which we produce roughly 4,000 tons. A lot of you will be familiar with the other figures there. The world production of mussel sits on about 2 million tons. China a long way in the lead with 1 million tons. The EU countries together 500,000 tons, with the Spanish the biggest one there, about 300,000 tons. And then, to me, interestingly, Chile on about 300,000 tons. And Chile has a history, a very proud history, really, from nowhere in the 1980s to the 300,000 tons now. I think most of their mussels going to Europe. Anyhow, that's just a sort of perspective there. Mussel farming is a business of small margins. Every mussel farmer elsewhere in the world will agree with me there. It is no different in South Africa. Because of our small industry, we do not have benefits of scale to help us afford things, expensive things like food safety programs and such. The farmers have to pay for it all. Next slide there, please, Etienne. Etienne, I don't know if you wanted to field questions. You please do if you want to do at the interruptions between the different slides.
Force, I think we're good to keep going. I see some questions coming in.
Okay.
I will respond to those as we go along.
Okay, great. Little bit of history here. 40 years ago, the aquaculturists here in Saldanha spotted two things, and they can recognize a gap when they see it. We saw that we had a foreign species of mussels that's suitable for aquaculture, the Spanish mussel that was introduced. And we also noticed that we have a harbor that shouldn't be here. So we applied to government for aquaculture farming permits and also aquaculture water leases, both of which government never heard of before. So 40 years ago, we managed to get these going in Saldanha, and farming started there at the hand of the Spanish mussel. The little side note, the first attempt of mussel farming actually happened in Kabeja, previously Port Elizabeth, on our east coast, where a company saw it fit to buy a Spanish mussel raft and import it into South Africa, and they attempted to do perma on this raft. They soon realized their mistake, and they relocated to the nutrient-rich waters of our west coast. We still to this day use mainly Spanish-style mussel rafts. A little bit of adaptation. We'll see a picture just now. And then more recently, in the more exposed waters, New Zealand-style longlines. It is true that mussel farming has a rather checkered history with some spectacular flops. As much as half of the startups in mussel farming over the years have simply crashed out due to various reasons, which we could possibly go into question and answer later. Recently, though, there's a aquaculture development zone to the tune of nearly 900 hectares. It's been established in Saldanha, mainly in the more exposed outer bays. 200 hectares of which was soon taken up by prospective mussel farmers. Next slide there, Etienne. There's a picture of the mussel raft in the background with a harvesting wheel, which we also saw in Nolan's video just now. But production, yes. 5 farming operations produce nearly 4,000 tons of blackfish mussels a year here in Saldanha. Farm gate value, 30 million. That is rand, not dollar or euro. You can make your own calculations on what the farm gate price per kilogram of mussels is. 3,000 of these tons are produced on 120 hectares still to this day by 4 long-standing mussel farmers. They're all using raft culture in a more protected inner bay of Saldanha. Mussel farming probably provides around 500 direct jobs, mostly downstream in 3 processing plants. Next slide, Etienne, please. The powerful Benguela current creates and our strong offshore southerly winds creates a massive upwelling system, the Benguela upwelling system here on our west coast. Extremely nutrient-rich waters. Filter feeders like mussels and oysters love it. You know, we see something like 5 million plankton cells per liter of water. Is not unusual here. It's like a thick soup here at times. Not surprisingly, this drives some of the fastest growth rates of mussels recorded. Settlement, this is larval settlement onto the ropes. The market size is well under a year. Also, not surprisingly, some of the most intense biotoxin blooms in the world occur here. Paralytic shellfish poisoning, PSP and DSP, diuretic shellfish poisoning blooms annually stops from harvesting for hopefully not too long, but it's here all the time, particularly this time of year between January, February and May. Next slide, Etienne. Peering into the future here. Should we be able to master the exposed waters in the new ADZ in the Outer Bay and North Bay, and amidst all that, handle the biotoxin blooms, even then, South Africa will remain in world terms a tiny producer. Probably the maximum potential of farm gate, 15 tons live fresh mussels per year. Next one, Etienne. Go to the market. I think worldwide there's a growing market for mussels. A lot of that is also driven, I think, by people wanting to eat healthier and looking out for, well, sources of protein, of healthy protein. Internationally, mussels are consumed in the countries that produce them. There seems to be a demand market trend internationally, but competition, I think, is pretty cutthroat. Third point is Africans are not traditional seafood consumers, unfortunately for us, let alone mussels. The South African market is probably 800-ton frozen, mainly half shell frozen, plus a 300-ton fresh live market. Almost all of it into the catering trade and not the retail trade. We were an importer of mussels, in fact, until about 2016, when we become self-supportive with the expanding mussel farming in Ghana. Next slide, Etienne, please. And then just looking at the frozen portion of the market and export. Small export started here in frozen in 2020. We see 2023. We see 500 tons of frozen mussel exported. Next slide, again. And then looking into the future for the market, I think it is so that South Africa has its challenges to get listed for export, particularly to the EU. But there are challenges, whether it revolves around competent authority capacities or other reasons. We're not going to just walk into export markets. In the short term, we see that with the current challenges in mussel farming here, estimated 2,000 tons of frozen product, plus, as I said earlier, the 300 tons of fresh live into the local market. But of that, half will be exported short term. If we look longer term, it is our view that should we be able to overcome the farming hurdles as well as the export hurdles, South Africa might get up to a maximum of 7,000 tons of frozen product, and it will have to be export market because it's not going to go into the local market. I think the next slide is up there again. I'm finished. Thanks, everybody.
Great, Fos, thank you for that. Before you go, Fos, that prediction or that estimate of another 7,000 tons, if that's exported, can we assume that a portion of that 7,000 tons will have to go to the European market, or are there other markets in the rest of the world that might absorb that additional export product? Your views on that, Fos?
I'll be hesitant to say EU. I think it will be very difficult to get into there, and I think it's extremely competitive market there. I think I mentioned earlier that the Chileans were there, and I mean they have a massive footprint into Europe, so we immediately will be up against them. So I would imagine if it was my call, I would spend my energies to try and find little niche markets elsewhere. We wouldn't mind getting into the EU, let me tell you that.
That's great, Fos. Certainly, there's places in Europe where mussels is such a big part of the culture. I'm pretty sure it would be a nice market to serve. Fos, I heard somebody speak about the potential of the North American/US market. Are any mussels from South Africa going that direction at the moment?
Yeah, they are. They are, and sadly enough, into Singapore, frozen. We're trying to get listed into Taiwan. There seems to be interest in Taiwan, but we're battling to get listed for Taiwan. But yeah, it's probably fairly safe to say with quantities like that you know, if you look at a container a week or whatever the case may be, it's probably safe to say that you'd find other markets and nibble at them elsewhere. Yes.
Great, Fos. And then my last question is: you've indicated that South Africa is now producing, is self-sufficient in terms of mussel production. Does that include canned mussels? A lot of us are only familiar with canned mussels and not fresh mussels. The South African canned mussel, is that farmed in South Africa or elsewhere?
All the canned mussels coming in here, and I think it's a world commodity, are imported. You know, Etienne, if you go into a canning, I've been in a canning factory, and I mean they put through in a month what we produce in a year. So setting up a cannery, it's a scale thing. So, you know, our entire mussel farm production here will probably not even justify a South African cannery. To put it bluntly, if you look at the great canning, the Philippines, you know, it's a different kettle of fish. You got let me put it this way: you got what 20 or 15 mussels in a can, and you're buying the can right now. You can go into the local supermarket here and buy a can for probably under 15 rand.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, having said that, I mean, the mussels going into the South African market, is there an alternative way to get that into retail instead of just into catering service? Maybe I'm going too much into detail, but maybe you've got a view on that.
No, look, I think we keep on trying to convince the retail market or the buyers, the consumers to buy retail. But as I said in my talk, we're not as a traditional seafood eater, so it's slowly growing, but much slower than one would want. Because of that we not the traditional seafood eater, not let alone bivalve shellfish eater.
Yeah, sure, certainly. First, thank you for that. I can see questions coming through on the Q&A panel. I'm going to give a short presentation, and then we'll certainly take as many of those questions as possible. Dr. Allerain, I think it is. Yes, we will make the presentation available in PDF. We'll make that link available to you tomorrow. Other questions, Lisa, I can see you've typed an answer for the question on empowerment of natural resources. Lisa, I'm going to come back to you on that discussion after my short presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We've got about just over 30 minutes left. I've indicated to you already that Trade Forward Southern Africa last year and the year before did some work on dealing with some of the export barriers that Foss Pienaar referred to in his presentation. I was lucky enough to be involved in some of that work, and last week I gave an introduction to the TFSA work, and I spoke a little bit about the necessity for export. And we've heard again today that if we want to grow the mussel industry, then certainly it's going to depend on growing the export market. Today, I want to look at some of the nuts and bolts in what we call the compliance roadmap. It's a document that was developed by TFSA to deal with some of these regulatory regulations and challenges, particularly around access to the EU market for products such as mussels farmed in South Africa. And then next week, when we have a webinar on oysters, I will be looking at some of the recommendations and some of the other work that TFSA have done in this program. I showed this little diagram last week when we spoke. I'm not going to repeat everything again, but it's really a trade map of seafood across the world. And if you look carefully, you'll see South Africa doesn't really participate in the world trade of seafood, nor does the rest of Africa really participate much. And certainly we are having to address this if we want to see our aquaculture industry grow. The primary interventions by Trade Forward Southern Africa in this work was to develop some detailed guidelines around the compliance requirements. You'll see in the next slide, I will show some of these regulations, and you'll quickly realize that accessing the European market or the EU market is not as simple as compliance to one or two pieces of legislation. It's quite complex. The TFSA work also did a review of the shellfish monitoring programs. both in South Africa and in Namibia, and looked particularly at where there were shortcomings in the shellfish monitoring programs, so that these can be shown to the EU authorities, and the progress that has been made in South Africa can be shown, so that we do become compliant in terms of the export of products such as mussels. We then went ahead after this work to develop what we now call the compliance roadmaps. And these two documents, one for Namibia and one for South Africa. On the South African side, it was called the Roadmap Towards European Union Compliance. And certainly if you have a look at the Trade Forward Southern Africa website, you will pick up a copy of this document if you would like to go and have a look at the details. What I also showed last week was the 4 pillars on which compliance for the EU market rests. These pillars are at the top of your screen: food safety. So these farm products like mussels have to have met food safety requirements. They also need, in the second pillar, to meet veterinary drug residue compliance regulations. In the third pillar, they have to be monitored for marine biotoxins. We heard in the presentation that Saldanha Bay, where mussels are farmed, is also subject to very high levels of blooms of marine biotoxins. And I'll tell you a little bit more about marine biotoxins in next week's webinar. Then lastly, these products have to meet standards around aquatic animal health. And those 4 pillars make out the compliance framework or compliance network to obtain access into these EU markets. It does get quite complex. The EU sanitary requirements, and this is just a table taking it from the top, listing all of the regulations that need to be complied with. And if you count this up very quickly, I don't know the precise number, but there's in the region of 15 or 16 regulations dealing with various aspects, from food safety right through to microbiological compliance, veterinary medicine residue compliance, animal health compliance, and then over and above how one goes about the certification of these products and how they meet all of these compliance requirements. In the South African situation, we have various government departments that have authority over these issues. For instance, the veterinary controls are dealt with by a specific government organization. The microbiological requirements are dealt with by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, Lisa's department that we heard from. Many of the other requirements are dealt with through, the certification is dealt with through what we used to call the SABS. They deal with some of the certification requirements, the final certificate that needs to show that these products are safe. This little table to me is quite interesting when we look at the South African farm products. On the far left, you've got a division between the filter feeders like oysters and mussels and the non-filter feeders like abalone, which we discussed last week. The next column differentiates between wild-caught product and farmed or aquaculture product, and then the state in which it is when it's delivered to the market. Is it live or is it processed? We heard in the abalone webinar last week that most or much of our abalone is sold from aquaculture. Much of that is sold in a live form. And if you follow the columns across, you will look at the controls that are required in terms of microbiology and marine biotoxins. The next column, you will look at the requirements in terms of aquatic animal health. The next column in terms of veterinary medicine residues. And lastly, the last column shows the requirements in terms of food safety and environmental contaminants. So just as an example, as we're talking mussels today, if you take mussels that are produced in aquaculture and it's delivered to the market live, and this is obviously referring to the EU market, then you would need control systems and certification in place in terms of microbiology, aquatic animal health, veterinary medicine, and food safety. All of the boxes are ticked. If, however, that product is delivered processed from aquaculture, then the requirements around aquatic animal health fall away, which makes the bar that needs to be met just slightly easier in terms of product. One of the recommendations that came out of the TFSA work was particularly to focus on which products target these lucrative EU markets. Taking a product that has got a high barrier to entry around a very onerous set of regulations that need to be met is quite difficult. However, if one takes a processed product that has less requirements to meet, possibly having less aquatic animal health requirements, then it's easier to get those products into market and then develop the remaining products around that. So a lot of the crux of the TFSA work focused around which product lines would be easier to get into the market initially, and which product lines can then be developed around that. A couple of things around the current EU compliance in South Africa. The general food safety and hazard conditions for fishery products, that's general wild-caught fishery products. In South Africa, the official control systems for general hygiene and food safety requirements are already in place. We have many fisheries products. Hake comes to mind, that is exported from South Africa into the EU, and these requirements have already been met. South Africa has also met the requirements for the export of fishery products to EU, including the hygiene requirements and the hazard analysis and critical control point requirements. So it's not a very long stretch of the imagination that these requirements can also be met for products like abalone and mussels. However, there are shortcomings around the aquaculture products, particularly around veterinary medicine. And I can tell you that the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment have worked exceptionally hard to put these in place so that they can meet these requirements going forward. These requirements also need to be met for biological and marine biotoxin monitoring. And those monitoring systems have received more attention in the last months, particularly around live bivalve mollusks as mussels, as we've spoken. It counts for other products as well, like marine gastropods and products of animal origin from these animals for human consumption. And possibly we'll say more on marine biotoxin monitoring when we conclude this series next week around oysters. And then lastly, it was found that there were additional requirements around aquatic animal health conditions that had to be met. And once again, I can confirm that the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment have worked exceptionally hard to put these additional requirements in place so that EU export does become viable. I want to refer you once again to these roadmap documents, which are available on the Trade Forward Southern Africa website. If you want more details around how these requirements need to be met to access the EU markets, please go and have a look at these documents. And I will certainly say a little bit more around the content of these documents in our concluding webinar next week. I have referred to the fact that we'll be speaking about oysters next week. That'll be the final of the three-part series. I will conclude the content of the TFSA roadmap documents and also the work that the TFSA have done on improving biotoxin monitoring along not only the South African coastline, but also along the Namibian coastline. If you have a smartphone in your hand, you can scan that QR code to take you to the registration page for next week's webinar. I look forward to seeing a lot of you there as well. And that will be our concluding session on the 23rd of February. Right, that brings me to the end of my short presentation. We have about 20 minutes or so left to take some questions. I can see several questions have been put online. If you have put a question into the chat panel, please do us a favor and put it online as well. It makes it easier for us to, or put it in the Q&A panel. it makes it easier for us to find your question there. Kevin Mart was asking around the access of indigenous Khoi people to aquaculture resources on the west coast of South Africa. I see, Lisa, you've written an answer to that as well. Lisa, do you mind if I go over to you and you can perhaps just summarize for us what the question and what the answer was to that particular question? Lisa, over to you.
Thanks,
Lisa,
yes.
Thanks. If you can answer that for us, great.
Okay, yes, I'm here. So with the Operation Pakisa government priority program, what we've done is open up sort of more water space within Saldanha Bay with Transnet, and a lot of that space was allocated was advertised, and the requirements was that the companies are BE level 1. There was a specifications set out. So there was applications made, and they were allocated water space. Ferdy would know exactly the amount of hectares that we allocated at the time. He was quite involved in there. And many of these farmers, I think about 13 of them, are black farmers, and they own the whole space. They rent the space from Transnet National Ports Authority, and they are allocated that area to farm mussels, basically. Yeah.
All right. Lisa, thank you for that answer. Lisa, I can see Kevin Mart has typed various comments, and I'm going to propose that Kevin contact you directly once we show your email address. I'm sure there will be further discussions on that.
Sure, certainly. We can do that separately, yes. No problem.
Great. An old supporter of our webinars from Sanisa, William Leshen, has asked around the funding. Sim, I can see you busy typing an answer. Sim, just for the benefit of the whole audience, do you mind just giving a short indication of where the funding for this webinar series and the work comes from? Sim, can I ask you to do that for us?
Thank you very much, Etienne. You've actually served me the typing. I'm not the fastest typer of all. So this project is Straightforward Southern Africa is sponsored by FCDO. So that's the component that's actually sponsoring this project, and it's a regional project. South Africa happens to be the biggest in terms of aquaculture. So it's not specific to South Africa, but it's actually within the region itself. I think that's what the question was referring to. And I'm quite happy to engage further with maybe Jose in terms of maybe explaining how we can actually collaborate and work together on this.
Excellent. Yeah, Sim, perhaps for the sake of the audience, I can just say, Jose, the TFSA program certainly has Mozambique in its sight as well, and part of the countries that it serves. So, Jose, it's going to be exciting to see if you can link up with Sim and then take this discussion further. There was, I remember being involved in work around mussel farming for Mozambique, and I see, Jose, you've mentioned perna, the brown mussel, and certainly it would be interesting to see if work can go ahead around mussel farming in Mozambique. I see there was a question from Omar, I think it's Izabaha. Omar, you are asking around the seed collection for mussels, and you are asking whether they are collection structures or hatcheries, or whether seed collection is done in natural beds. Foss, can I ask you to comment on the collection of seed for mussel farming?
Yes, of course. The collection of seed, we must settle on our production ropes as we go along, particularly in the late spring, early summer. We have spawnings of the mussels, even the wild mussels and the farm mussels on our ropes. They spawn, and of course it's a mass spawning. The one triggers the other, and you have massive spawning, male and females, and the larvae come and settle on whatever you hang in the water in the vicinity. In our case, we on our production ropes, they come and settle, and we use those little, when we harvest the rope, there's little mussels about 20 or 30 millimeters long already, and we use and reseed our ropes with those. So no hatchery mussels. I'm not aware of hatchery mussels anywhere in the world on any commercial or big scale. If that answers your questions, you got more, I'm happy to answer.
Great, thank you, Foss. I think that answers the question around getting seed. Here's an interesting question from Stephen Gunser. Lisa, I'm going to throw this one to you. Stephen is saying at the scale that we're farming, with all of the health monitoring requirements and water lease costs and other expenses, it makes it quite difficult for a South African mussel farmer to be viable. And Stephen is asking if there's any government assistance to help these farmers get out into these international markets at a viable price. Lisa, can you comment on that for us?
Yes, we've got an incentive fund that is administered by the Department of Trade, Industry and Cooperation called ADA. It's called the Aquaculture Development and Enhancement Program. I can send you the guidelines on that. So that is a reimbursement. So whatever investment you've put into the farm, you get a percentage back. Yeah, and it's up to 45% back of your investment.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for that. Stephen, if you need more information, I'll share Lisa's email at the end. You are welcome to follow that up. Right. I have launched an online poll, which you will see on your screen now. I see around 38%, 39% of the people that are online have answered the poll so far. Please answer. I think there's about 5 questions. Please answer these. They're multiple choice. It takes you just a few seconds. And this feedback is really, really critical going forward, looking at where trade for Southern Africa can make a difference. So please answer these questions. It really helps not only in the webinars, but it helps us take aquaculture forward for the South African region. I do see we still have some time left. If there are any live questions, if anybody would like to ask a question live to either Lisa or to Foss or to Sim, please raise your hand and I can open up your microphone and you can go ahead. So if there are live questions, please raise your hand and I will pick you up there. Anybody wants to raise a hand? I don't see anything coming through. Lots of comments on the chat panel. There we go. Antonio Tonen. Antonio, thanks. I know you are an old hand in the Saldanha mussel and oyster sector. Antonio, you can carry on.
Hi, this is actually a response to the question from the gentleman from Mozambique who was asking about perna. There's 2 things I'd like to just sort of fill him in on. And one is that perna is a species that we have attempted to cultivate. Like Foss did mention a failed attempt to farm mussels in Algoa Bay 30, 40 years ago. I was part of that. And our research showed that the problem with perna is that it has multiple annual spawnings and they're uncoordinated within populations. So from a commercial perspective, you never get any particular time of the year where your entire crop is in peak condition for harvesting, which makes it, although technically possible to cultivate, very uncompetitive when compared with species like Mytilus galloproventialis or the commercial Corymytilus species that are cultivated, for example, in Chile. And then as far as seed production goes, it's quite interesting to note that in New Zealand, which has a very large and successful mussel industry based on a congene, and not perna, but perna viridis, they are running into seed shortage situations. And it would be really instructive for anybody who's interested to contact the Cawthron Institute in New Zealand, who are driving Perna seed production research currently, and to grow their own industry. But it's a challenging thing, and I think my final comment would be that hatcheries tend to be pretty knowledge and capital intensive, and so the prospects of starting one for Perna in Southern Africa not particularly good.
All right, Antonio, thank you. Some really valuable inputs there, particularly around the brown mussel or Perna, which is often spoken about. Thank you very much, Antonio. We have a raised hand. I'm really going to try my very best to pronounce the name. Onyedikachi Okioma Evalobi. I hope I got that slightly right. Onyedikachi, you can please go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, Onyedikachi, we lost you there for a second, but you can unmute and go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be part of the training today. I've been attending your webinars for some time now, and they are very interesting. Now, my question is for the presenter, Vopena. I wish to know, is it attached to any university in South Africa? In Nigeria here, we don't really have farms, culturing Mussel. So I wouldn't mind trying to develop that in Nigeria. Is it connected to any university? Maybe we can come and do some program to develop that here.
Great. Thank you for that question. Foss, I'm going to come to you. The mussel industry in South Africa, is there a lot of research? Is it attached to any particular university? Your views on that, Foss?
Not particularly. It's a mature technology. There's, the research on mussels that needed to be done is done, kind of thing. So no attachments like in that sense. It's commercial, it's going. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, of course, it does answer the question. So I think what we need to say is that there's no active university program at the moment in South Africa looking at the mussel sector. I don't think that excludes the possibilities of having universities look at something if something comes up from the research side. Our friend from Nigeria that asked the question, I believe it's possible for you to reach out to local universities like, I'm thinking of the University of Ibadan, and checking whether they can link up with other African institutions. But I think the first thing would be to check if there's potential for mussel production in other areas of Africa, which we possibly haven't done for the African continent yet. I see we've got a response rate of 69% on the poll questions. Let's try and get that above 75%. If you haven't answered the questions on the online poll, please take just a few seconds to answer them. And then I will share the results of that poll just before we end today's session. We still do have a few minutes if there are any other live questions. I see here on the chat panel, Rob Fletcher, apologies if I missed this, but why are all the farms only in one bay? And are those the only suitable areas? Lisa, I see you busy typing an answer to Rob. Lisa, do you mind sharing that answer just verbally as well?
Sure, yes. Saldanha Bay is a sheltered bay in the Western Cape. However, I'm just confirming with my colleagues if mussels is listed in Algoa Bay as well, in the Eastern Cape. That's a new area that we've demarcated for aquaculture activity, and that's open for new farmers to show their expression of interest. We do have a farm also in PE, in the PE Harbour as well, a mussel farm, under the Nice and Oyster Company. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Vos, do you want to comment on the suitability of other areas in South Africa?
Yes, Rob, lead me a little bit here, but there are no other suitable bays, in my opinion, on the South African coast, apart from Saldanha. I mentioned in my talk the extremely nutritious waters of the West Coast here in Saldanha, and the function of mussel farming, you can look everywhere in the world. You typically find it in areas of very rich waters. In other words, lots of plankton in the water, and typically on the west coast of countries or continents, or where they have upwelling systems. The east coast does not have that. So I've got my misgivings whether there's enough food in the water on the east coast, to put it bluntly. And then secondly, one looks for protected waters with good water circulation, and that is in short supply on the South African coast. If you mean that otherwise in Saldanha, in other words, why only the inner bay and not the more exposed outer bays? The areas operate in the outer bay are the most exposed areas, and it's early days to overcome the shall I say, the violence of sea conditions out there with the structures that we use to try and farm there. I hope that answers your question. You can expand on it if you want.
No, that's great, Vos. Really appreciate that input. I see a question from Mahung. Mahung, we're not going to deal with freshwater oysters and mussels at this stage. Certainly something interesting for the future to discuss. I do see there's one or two more live questions. We are slowly starting to run out of time. Petrus, you've raised your hand for a live question. Petrus, you can unmute and ask.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I'm being a bit late. I was having a doctor appointment, but I picked up certain few things. I just wanted to find out, is this session has been recorded, or so that I can maybe pick up the one that I did not attend, the first, I think the first 30 minutes.
Great. Yes, certainly this is recorded, and in your email tomorrow you will get a link to the recording. So yeah, thank you for that. That's covered. Antonio, I see you've raised your hand again. I just want to give some others a quick chance. Ixon Carstens, Ixon, you can carry on before we run out of time. Ixon.
Hi, Etienne, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Just about the locations, I am based, our organization is based on the False Bay Coast, the Strandfontein strip of False Bay Coast, and we are in the process of applying and looking at starting farming on that side. You all know that the desalination plant was there at one stage at Strandfontein Beach, and that is set the precedent basically of having a farm initiative started there on the very same spot. So based on what Mr. Pinar has put forward, of course, the conditions conducive on the False Bay Coast, the Strandfontein Muizenberg side for farming. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Very good question. I see Ferdi Inderman has responded to some of the questions around where the conditions are right for mussel and oyster farming. Vos, your opinion, the False Bay side of the Western Cape, would that work for mussel farming?
It's very exposed. I think, Irshan, come and have a cup of coffee with me, and I'll take you out on the boat here in Saldanha, and we can talk about this thing.
Vos, that's, I think, the most valuable offer that you can possibly give him. Ixon, I want to encourage you to go and visit Vos and discuss it with him. We are running out of time. Angela, Angela Caporelli, my good friend from the USA. Angela, nice to have you in our webinar. Angela, you can go ahead. Your microphone is open.
Thanks, Etienne. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, my question was, has there been any success? I'm working with some farmers from Madagascar and we're looking at different opportunities there. Has there been any success with polyculture, different species, mussels, let's say, and oysters, and especially algae or kelps? And
All
would
right.
that helps fit under the same food safety regulations that were so excellently presented?
Thank you, Angela. A really great question. So the waters of Madagascar are a lot different than the waters of the west coast of South Africa. I do know of several people that have looked at polyculture in that area, and certainly I'm happy to link you up with them. Your question around the food safety, if it's going to European Union, it would be the same regulatory requirements. And having done this work, it's not so much the requirement itself than the burden of cost and scale. So a smaller project to meet all of the food safety requirements, monitoring requirements, and so forth, it becomes really difficult as a cost barrier to compliance. But Angela, I'm quite happy to link you up with some other people. Thank you for that question. Right, Antonio, we have about a minute. If you can keep it really short, your final comments, Antonio.
I'll try to keep it brief. It's relates to the numbers that Force presented, which I believe are pretty accurate, which show 30 tons per hectare roughly produced in the inner bay, but roughly only 4 tons per hectare in the outer bay. And then I refer to the questions relating to new entrants into the industry, and particularly people who have a historical ties to the area. Lisa mentioned that there's 13 new black-owned entities. My concern is that if the production figures from these exposed bays, the North Bay and the Outer Bay, are so low, is it not potentially leading people into potential financial difficulty to expect them as new entrants to be farming uncharted waters where there has not yet been commercial success?
Yeah, very good question, Antonio. I'm afraid we're probably not going to have enough time to unpack that, but I would like to do justice to it by asking Lisa maybe to comment. Lisa, I'm putting you on the spot here because I don't know if we've got time to really unpack this properly. Lisa, do you want to comment on that?
So, Tony, are you referring to the Outer Bay where Atlantic Royal is farming? They are a commercially viable farm, and they have a lot of these farms and as mentorship farms under them.
All right, because we've run out of time, I'm going to leave that there.
Okay.
But it's certainly something, Lisa, that maybe yourself and Antonio can discuss further. Sure. I see on our poll we've had an 81% response rate. If you still want to answer, you've got a few seconds left to do that. I am going to close the session today just by asking each one of our speakers for a final, very short comment. Lisa, should we start with you? Just 1 or 2 sentences as we close off.
I think, yes, thank you so much for the platform and involving government. And I think working hand in hand with industry, we can move the mussel farming industry further. Yeah, and we are here to support the sector. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. I've launched the results of the poll if you want to have a look at that. Foss, from your side, just a short word as we part and close the session.
Well, thanks for indeed to you, and Luther, continue. We'll try and do something more with mussel farming in South Africa.
Great, thank you, Foss, for those last words. Sim, your parting comments.
Thank you very much, Etienne. I think mine is an easy one, really. It's just to thank yourself thank Lisa and thank Voss for all the discussions that we've had today. I think these have been very, very fruitful. For us, it's really speaks to people networking. I enjoyed it when Voss actually offered to take one of our participants for dinner or for coffee to discuss activities around improving our production and also obviously improving our exports. So we're really happy about this and really appreciate the participants who are also engaged. And we look forward to collaborating further on our next webinar next week. So thank you very much, Etienne.
Great, thank you, Sim. You're going to get yourself into trouble. So that cup of coffee has now been upgraded to dinner. Voss, I'm sure you're not going to buy anybody dinner, but I'm sure you're open for a cup of coffee. Thanks, Sim. That's a great parting comment from my side. I look forward to seeing you in the webinar next week. I will leave the email addresses on for another minute or so. Wherever you are in the world, have a nice rest of your day. If you are on the African continent, have a nice evening, and we'll see you in the webinar next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.